Recumbent in pose, she rests, barefoot, ankles crossed. Her left fingers lightly rest across the strand of pearls elegantly draped around her neck. Her right hand upturned and bent away from her in a sleeper's form. Her suit is crisp ivory blouse and tan wool, her pencil skirt leading the eye to the smooth curve of a stocking-clad calf. Her lips are a salacious red. Her golden hair frames her lovely face. Her expression is serene, smooth, and untroubled. She looks as if she has been caught in an afternoon nap, dreaming about her husband-to-be and the life they would share in just a few weeks. Evelyn Frances McHale was one of 8 children, raised by a single father in Tuckahoe, New York, throughout the 1930s. A member of the Women's Army Corps during high school, she was independent, smart, and driven to succeed. In a time when a woman's place was often considered the kitchen, she was a bookkeeper at a prominent engravings company in Manhattan. She had met the man of her dreams, and the two were to be married in the June of 1947.
I don't want anyone in or out of my family to see any part of me. Could you please destroy my body by cremation? I beg of you and my family, don't have any service for me or remembrance for me. My fiancé asked me to marry him in June. I don't think I would make a good wife for anybody. He is much better off without me. Tell my father I have too many of my mother's tendencies.
On May 1st, she emerged from an elevator onto the observation deck of the Empire State Building. She draped her jacket over the rail, penned a small note, which she tucked into the pocketbook she laid beside her coat, stepped up onto the concrete railing wall, and stepped into the open air. Evelyn plummeted 86 stories through the clear morning sky, as if she were an angel cast from heaven, hitting a car on the street below with so much force that the vehicle's metal body warped around her. To onlookers, she appeared as if hands had sculpted the car to cradle her sleeping form, so completely embedded was she in the mangled mass of Detroit steel. Her wish to go unremembered would, however, be neglected. Within minutes of her fateful impact, a photography student ran across the street and snapped a picture of her at rest, as if it were a hammock she lay in, and not the twisted remains of a limousine. His photo, titled "The Most Beautiful Suicide," became so famous it was featured prominently in Time magazine, as well as served as the groundwork for the print "Suicide, Fallen Body" by Andy Warhol. Even now, nearly 80 years later, her grim remembrance adorns noir artwork designs, record labels, and music videos. This poor girl's only wish was to escape the crushing ennui of her mental illness and spare her family the shame of her selfish act. But our fascination with death instead elevated her to a position of immortality. These are dark times, and these stories come from very dark places. Hello, listeners. My name is Johnas Armitage, and you're listening to Stories from Dark Places. Today we bring you episode 6 of our broadcast, and return to the sprawling, epic, global apocalypse that you, the viewer, I should say listener, have asked for. But first, I would like to thank Melly Dukes for lending her voice to tonight's broadcast. You can find her on YouTube or on Twitter as Queen Villian Melly. And I would like to apologize for the hum or distortion you might be experiencing in the background. For some reason, 8 o'clock on a Sunday night is the ideal time for the Innsmouth Chamber of Commerce to do all of their collective yard work, site maintenance, and blacktop laying in the parking lot, apparently. I swear this town's out to get me. Anyway, without further ado, I bring you Chapter 5 of Spores by Creepimonkeiboi.
Evan dropped the dirty gloves into the red hazard trash can next to the workstation and leaned back into his chair. He thought about picking up the phone again, but decided to just be patient. No sense in panicking, he thought to himself. Evan had flown into Istanbul 2 weeks ago on a work visa for what he described to the consulate as meteorological survey work. In truth, Evan was a rock chaser for major universities in the US and Europe. Colleges paid handsomely for verified meteorite samples, especially those that had landed recently. It was lucrative work, but as Evan discovered, completely dependent on the whims of the solar system. When Evan had gotten notice that an object had entered atmosphere and made groundfall, he started working immediately on obtaining his visa through the Turkish government. Turkey, at least, was a moderately developed country, and although the Minister of Interior representative he spoke to directly eyed him skeptically, he rightfully had no justification to deny him. Evan's work, although profit-motivated, was legitimate. The samples would go to scholarly institutions. Unlike the droves of rock hunters that descended on landing sites looking to make a quick buck selling their wares on the internet, Evan had collected referrals at every major university in the States and throughout Europe, which the minister quickly tired of calling. In truth, Evan preferred the simplicity of working in foreign countries. With his visa, he had written authorization to search for and retrieve any samples he could find. In the U.S., he often found himself obtaining permits from local jurisdictions, then now claiming ownership of all the results of his work. He trained in from the capital city of Erzurum, where he spent several days procuring supplies and guides to work for him. The object was recorded as having made landfall somewhere in the mountains near the border of Georgia. Evan thought back to 4 days ago when one of his guides, Fidan, had approached him outside his tent. Come see, the boy had said. Evan had obliged the boy mostly to humor him. The boy led him just past a nearby ridge and near a clear mountain stream. There, next to the water, lay a hawk, black stalks growing from between its feathers and from its mouth. Fidan had tried to get close to the bird, but Evan pulled him away. Don't get close to that thing. That's probably mold. You'll get sick, Evan told him, and the boy looked away towards the bird, disappointed. Did you touch it already? Evan asked. Fidan shook his head no. The next day, their courier from Erzurum arrived with supplies. He told Evan that he could not return until 10 days, as he was delivering medicine to a village west of them. The village had come down with sickness that spread rapidly among the people and livestock. Later that day is when Evan found the rabbit, outside of camp, weak and sickly looking with more of those black stalks growing from its back. Carefully, Evan had taken a sample of the infection and had one of his men burn the animal away from their sight. The phone next to him rang, and he quickly jerked the receiver up. Mabule? He said. Evan, is that you, my friend? Responded the voice on the other end. Evan had called an old colleague from his days at the biology department at Stanford, before he had switched his major. Mabule Jernan was a marine biologist who worked in California. Hey, Mac, I wanted to get your insight on some organism that I've collected samples of here in Turkey. I've never seen anything like it. I know it's not your primary field, but I know you were born and raised here, and I figured if anyone would know. Of course, Evan. I also got your email with the photographs and spectral analysis. I'm sorry that it took me so long to get back to you. What I am looking at seems like some kind of fungus or mold species, obviously parasitic. Maybe some variation of the cordyceps fungus. I've never seen one that attacks mammals, though. It's definitely not indigenous to that region. Have only animals been affected? I'm not sure. I've heard some chatter about people being affected, Evan said. If that is true, this could be something to worry about. If you can safely do so, I would like you to send a sample to a friend in Cairo that specializes in these types of organisms. I will contact my uncle, who works for the Council of Ministers, and make sure they are aware. After briefly talking about family and old friends, Evan said goodbye to Mabule, still with a sick feeling in his gut. Hours later, Evan was woken up by Afrit shaking his shoulder. Mr. Evan, he whispered, please come now. Fidan is sick. Evan grabbed his glasses and slid into his shoes as he followed Afrit into the brisk night air. He was led to the makeshift outhouse at the edge of the camp, where Afrit handed Evan a flashlight and pointed at the door. Evan wrapped his shirt up over his nose and mouth, somewhat to protect himself from any illness, but mostly to cover the rancid stench that he knew was inside. Evan turned on his light and slowly cracked open the door. He shone his light over the figure of a young boy who sat in the corner quietly sobbing. On the boy's arms were several thick black ribbons. Fadan looked up with red watery eyes. "I'm sorry, Mr. Evan," Fadan blurted out. "I tried to move the bird before you told me not to, and I lied to you." Evan noticed a deep bloody hole in the boy's arm and a large amount of blood on the boy's shirt. "I tried to take them off, but it hurts badly." The boy had to be taken to Erzurum by one of his workers in the bed of their work truck. Evan expressly told them not to touch the boy's arms. He didn't know if that would matter. The next morning, he called Mabule again. His friend answered on the second ring. "Evan, are you there?" Mac said, obvious concern in his voice. "I'm here, Mac. It's jumped to humans. A boy here got sick last night," Evan said. "Dear God," Mabule breathed. "Evan, my friend, you must listen. I spoke to my uncle. This organism, it is dangerous. Many people are sick. Some are dead. Have you had any direct contact with infected animals or the boy?" "No, well, yes, I don't remember," Evan said. "Evan, you must leave now. Get away from that place." Evan started nodding, then paused. "The truck. Oh my God, Mac, they took the boy to the city with our truck. I can't leave here." "You must find a way to leave. The government is sending planes to stop." The line suddenly went dead, cutting off Mabule's warning. Evan tried dialing out again several times, without success. He walked outside and looked around. A flock of birds flew overhead away from the mountains. Evan heard a pair of jets pass overhead in the distance, and he felt and heard loud booming from the payload that they dropped. Smoke was pouring off the nearby ridge, blotting out the rising sun. Evan stood there in shock for a few minutes, before simply sitting down in the dirt. Another series of explosions, closer this time, sounded over the camp. He scratched at the back of a small black mole that had appeared overnight on his cheek.
What a disheartening thing to see. To find yourself sitting on the edge of the world, watching the flames roar up, seeing the people charged with the protection of the world so desperate to quench it all in fire. I cannot help but feel like this analogy is somewhat pertinent to the current situation. Anyway, that's all the time we have tonight. I would like to take this opportunity to thank our YouTube subscribers, as well as those of you who have come from Apple Podcasts, Anchor, Podcast Addict, CastBox, and whatever other podcast platform you use, for taking the time to come and share this story with us. Good night, listeners. And please, the next time you feel like something is watching you from the shadows, remember, there's nothing to be afraid of. After all, some of the best things only happen in the dark.
Stories from Dark Places was recorded before an imaginary studio audience. All stories performed on this podcast have express written consent from the original author. Johnas Armitage, his studio manager, and the entire staff of WZHP Radio Innsmouth are fictitious characters, and it's probably for the best that you continue to believe that. If you find yourself in a place where you feel death is your only way out, Google the suicide prevention or crisis hotline in your area and talk to someone. Your life is important.